Manuel Fernandez. Manuel Fernandez promised innovation. Sarah Ferguson gave him her endorsement. Together, they brought attention, and millions, to Vavoosh, a lifestyle app venture with grand ambitions and royal-adjacent backing. But behind the glossy facade, the business unraveled almost immediately. Despite raising around £9 million, including over £1 million in taxpayer funds, the company never released a working product. By the time it collapsed, the app was mired in legal disputes and creditor chaos. Ferguson, owed roughly £50,000 and not involved in daily operations, now finds a name inextricably linked to another financial embarrassment she can't easily distance herself from. The Vavoosh debacle is more than just a failed tech project. It mirrors a familiar pattern in Ferguson's public trajectory. Her ventures, whether charitable or commercial, often launch with fanfare before buckling under scrutiny. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. The charity linked to her brand, which hasn't filed accounts in 4 years and did negligible work, is now facing removal from the register. Combined with the fallout from past controversies and a diminished royal status, this latest scandal doesn't just dent her image, it reinforces a growing perception that behind each new initiative lies a recurring problem with judgment, accountability, and lasting consequences. If you love getting the real story behind the palace walls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. Sarah Ferguson cannot seem to outrun scandal. And at this point, the hits just keep coming. The former Duchess of York is once again facing public backlash, this time for her involvement in a failed lifestyle app called Vavoosh, a venture that managed to burn through an estimated £9 million, including over £1 million in taxpayer-backed funding. And despite all the buzz, all the backing, and all the royal-adjacent promotion, the app never launched. Not even a demo. No interface. No features. Not a single user. Just vanished funds and a long list of questions no one seems willing or able to answer. So how did we get here? Create new folder. Manuel Fernandez. The project launched in 2010 and was spearheaded by businessman Manuel Fernandez, who wasn't just a business associate but was also rumored to have a personal relationship with Fergie. Their connection gave the app a kind of unofficial royal glow. Sarah Ferguson publicly supported the project, appeared alongside Fernandez, and endorsed the vision behind it. She wasn't involved in the day-to-day, but her backing was a key piece of the public image the company built for itself. That kind of endorsement carries weight, especially when you're courting investors and applying for government grants. And yes, Vavoosh secured public money, over £1 million of it, through government tax credits intended to fund research and development. Those funds were supposed to support innovation. What they supported instead was a project that never produced a single product. What went wrong? Everything, basically. Internal communication breakdowns, legal disputes, unpaid debts. The company entered administration without ever delivering the app it promised. And in the process, it left behind a trail of frustrated creditors, including Sarah Ferguson herself, who was reportedly owed around £50,000. So now she's not just the face of the failure. She's a financial victim of it, too. But that hasn't spared her from criticism. Because the real issue here is bigger than just one bad investment. It's about judgment. And it's about pattern. Sarah Ferguson has a long history of questionable financial decisions. She's been in debt before, millions in the 1990s. She's endorsed product that fell flat. She's been caught in scandals involving money, access, and influence. And Vavoosh fits neatly into that long-running theme, a glamorous idea, a lack of substance, and an eventual collapse that damages everyone involved. And as if that weren't enough, her charity, the one tied to her ventures, is now also under serious scrutiny. According to reports, the charity failed to file accounts for 4 years. That's not a missed deadline. That's 4 consecutive years of silence on how funds were being managed, what projects were being supported, or whether anything charitable was actually happening. Regulatory authorities are now threatening to strike it off the official register. And just like that, another pillar of her public image, philanthropy, is crumbling under the weight of neglect and oversight. All of this is playing out while she's already under the spotlight for her connections to Jeffrey Epstein and her loss of royal titles. So when Vavoosh imploded, it wasn't just a failed business story. It was another chapter in a mounting narrative about poor judgment, financial instability, and an inability to separate personal relationships from professional choices. Manuel Fernandez, because Fernandez isn't just a businessman who failed to launch a product. He's a central figure with legal baggage, creditor disputes, and a complicated relationship with a woman who helped elevate his venture. His role, and Ferguson's proximity to it, adds a layer of personal entanglement that makes this whole saga harder to dismiss as a simple investment gone wrong. And here's where it really starts to sting. The money lost wasn't just private capital. It wasn't just Ferguson's £50,000 or investors hoping for a return. It was public money, taxpayer funding that was supposed to drive innovation, not disappear into a failed lifestyle app that never launched. When you look at the bigger picture, it's not just embarrassing, it's enraging. This was a government-backed venture. That means oversight, due diligence, accountability. But somehow, none of those things stopped this project from securing major funding, despite its lack of output. And the fact that it was connected, however loosely, to a former royal only deepens the public frustration. Because when someone with a title, a platform, and a long trail of controversy keeps getting involved in ventures that don't deliver, at what point do people stop looking the other way? What Vavoosh highlights isn't just a single business failure. It's the system that allowed it to get so far, so fast, with so little to show. And it's the way public figures like Ferguson continue to trade on their image to push projects that fall apart the moment the cameras turn off. We're looking at a collapse of a brand built on glamour and access, the downfall of an app that never existed, and the unraveling of a charity that stopped being charitable. And even if she wasn't in control of the finances or the day-to-day operations, Sarah Ferguson was part of the sales pitch. Her association gave Vavoosh credibility it didn't earn. And whether she wants it or not, she now owns part of the fallout. So where does this leave her? More vulnerable than ever. Her public standing is shaky. Her finances are again in question. Her charity is on the verge of being dissolved. And the media scrutiny is only getting more intense. Every new headline adds weight to a growing perception that Fergie, despite decades in the public eye, still hasn't learned how to manage her reputation or her relationships with any real sense of responsibility. And the consequences aren't just hers. They are ours. Because when public money is lost, when charitable organizations fail, and when accountability disappears behind a cloud of royal associations, it reflects a bigger failure, one of oversight, trust, and transparency. This isn't about disliking Sarah Ferguson. It's about expecting better. From people with power. From systems meant to protect public interest. From anyone who stands in front of a camera and asks for our faith and our funding. What do you think? Should Sarah Ferguson be held more accountable for her connection to Vavoosh? Should public funds be subject to stricter checks before being handed over to projects backed by high-profile names? And how much of this is about one person's bad decisions? And how much is about a larger problem in how we treat celebrity influence? Let us know in the comments. Like this if you think someone needs to answer for that £1 million. Share it with anyone who still thinks royal ties guarantee smart business. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories that expose the mess behind the headlines. Because failed apps fade, but bad judgment, that sticks. Let's not downplay what this really is, a disaster with a royal signature on it. Sarah Ferguson's latest scandal isn't just about a tech flop or a dodgy business partner. It's about a long, long trail of questionable choices that keeps circling back to one thing, judgment. Or more accurately, the lack of it. Because if you followed Fergie's post-royal career, you've seen the pattern. It's not subtle. A glamorous venture, a splashy media rollout, a few questionable names attached. And then, poof, things unravel. Investors vanish. Creditors get stiffed. And somehow, Sarah is always just barely out of reach when it's time to assign responsibility. But Vavoosh is different. This time, the public's paying attention not just because it failed, but because we helped fund it. The £1 million in taxpayer money that got sucked into this lifestyle app black hole, that's not monopoly money. That's real funding that could have gone to real innovation, real causes, real impact. Instead, it was tied up in a business that never even launched a product. And sure, the app had other investors, private ones, but the fact that it tapped into public funds meant it had to meet a different standard, a higher level of oversight. That's what those grants and tax credits are supposed to demand. But here we are, no app, no accountability, and a former duchess shrugging in the middle of the wreckage. And let's not gloss over that charity. 4 years without filing accounts. That's not an innocent mistake or an admin delay. That's sustained neglect. That's a red flag so massive it might as well be flying above Buckingham Palace. And what did the charity actually do during that time? Reports suggest basically nothing. This is someone who's built an entire brand around philanthropy, around reinvention, around helping others and being seen as a royal who made herself useful after divorce. But what kind of philanthropy fails to meet basic legal obligations for nearly half a decade? It's not just bad PR. It's reputational rut. And it doesn't help that this is all happening while Sarah Ferguson's name keeps surfacing in other scandals. Epstein, Andrew, shady business ties. Her loss of royal titles didn't come out of nowhere. It's the direct result of years of headlines just like this one. It's not one incident. It's a pile-up, a career-long traffic jam of controversy, broken promises, and eyebrow-raising relationships. Because that's what Vavoosh really represents, a symbol of the larger issue. It was never just about building an app. It was about trading influence for investment, using a name, a title, and a reputation to grease the wheels of funding. It's the kind of move that only works if people trust the name behind the project. And in Sarah Ferguson's case, that trust is running extremely low. Create new folder. Manuel Fernandez. Let's talk about Manuel Fernandez for a moment. He's the one who fronted the company. He was the face of the business side. And yet, by the end, he was being accused of unpaid debts and legal problems, while still insisting there was no misconduct. And Sarah, she was involved. She may not have been running spreadsheets, but she publicly supported this man. She shared stages with him. She vouched for the vision. She was owed £50,000. That's not just moral support. That's financial entanglement. So when the whole thing crashes, her involvement doesn't vanish with it. She doesn't get to claim distance while cashing in on the association when it's convenient. That's not how public credibility works. And yet, that's exactly the playbook. Over and over. Support the venture. Reap the media glow. Disappear when the questions start. Except this time, the questions aren't going away. And here's where it all starts to look really bleak. Because the deeper this goes, the more the same themes keep repeating. No transparency, no accountability, and no sign that she's learned anything. How many times do you get to say, I wasn't involved in the day-to-day, before people stop accepting that as an excuse? You endorsed it. You stood next to it. You let your name elevate it. That is involvement. And when that endorsement helps unlock millions, including public funds, you don't get to step back and act like you were just being supportive from the sidelines. The reality is, Vavoosh didn't just fail. It wasted money. It abused trust. And it further exposed the risks of allowing famous names to stand in for actual oversight. And it matters, because this is bigger than Sarah Ferguson. It's about what happens when access and clout get mistaken for credibility. It's about the systems that allowed this project to survive as long as it did without delivering a single result. And it's about the regulators and officials who nodded along as a glorified concept kept getting money thrown at it. And now we're left with a mess. A Duchess turned brand ambassador with another black mark on her resume. A government-backed project that never got off the ground. A charity that's likely to be dissolved. And a very public reminder that no amount of royal history can excuse this level of chaos. The sad part? This didn't have to happen, but instead, it joins a long line of Sarah Ferguson link failures, and the pattern becomes clearer than ever. So the question now is, what comes next? Will this be a turning point where Sarah Ferguson finally steps back from endorsing projects that can't stand on their own? Will regulators take this as a wake-up call to tighten their funding standards? Will the public demand more transparency from high-profile figures who play in the startup space? Or will it just fade into the background, like so many of her previous controversies? Because here's the truth, Fergie is not going away. She'll find another venture, another business partner, another comeback story to tell. That's always been the rhythm. But whether the public will keep listening, that's another matter entirely. Because this time, people aren't just skeptical, they're angry. Angry that money meant for innovation went into vaporware. Angry that someone with such a long history of financial failure is still treated like a serious business player. And angry that time and time again, the fallout lands on everyone but the person at the center. So if there's one thing we've learned from Vavoosh, it's this: putting a royal face on a business doesn't guarantee success. But it does guarantee headlines when it fails. And for Sarah Ferguson, those headlines are getting harder and harder to spin. And now, we're left with a question nobody seems eager to answer. How did anyone think this was going to work? Vavoosh wasn't some underground side hustle built in someone's garage. It was a high-profile, overfunded, overhyped tech venture, riding on public money, royal clout, and vague promises of a lifestyle revolution, backed by Sarah Ferguson's name, endorsed in public. And today, it's just a headline about another collapsed fantasy with £9 million gone and zero results. Let's be really clear. There's no gray area here. There's no, well, it kind of launched or it had potential. Vavoosh delivered nothing. No product. No service. Not even a functioning shelving app. This wasn't a delayed launch. It was vapor from the start. And somehow, it still managed to secure millions, including over £1 million from government tax credit schemes meant to support real innovation. So how did that happen? How does a company with no output end up receiving funding that could have gone to small businesses, research programs, or healthcare projects? It's not because of the tech. It's not because of the team. It's not because of the groundbreaking business model. It's because of who was attached to it. Sarah Ferguson might not have been on the board. She wasn't coding or handling operations. But her presence was a stamp of social proof. Her name turned heads. Her public support was part of the pitch. And when the person endorsing your project is a former duchess with deep ties to the royal family, people stop asking questions. And that's a problem. Because this isn't just a Sarah Ferguson problem. It's a systemic one. It's what happens when charisma and social status override due diligence. When someone's title matters more than someone's track record. When celebrity involvement is treated as a shortcut to credibility. And when accountability is treated like a PR inconvenience instead of a non-negotiable. And yet, even after the app collapsed, even as creditors lined up and regulators stepped in, there's still this silence from Ferguson's camp. No full explanation. No detailed walk back. Just the same distancing language we heard before. She wasn't running it. She didn't make the decisions. She was just showing support. But if she's owed £50,000, she was more than just a cheerleader. That's not an honorary title. That's money on the line. Which means, at the very least, she was financially entangled. She had skin in the game. And she's still acting like she was just around while everything fell apart. The truth is, this situation feels less like a one-off and more like a greatest hits compilation of the same old Sarah Ferguson playbook. Lavish promises, questionable business partners, a messy collapse, and a wave of headlines asking how it all happened again. Let's not forget, this isn't even the only thing crumbling under her name right now. Her charity, one of the few remaining parts of a public persona that still carried a shred of goodwill, is now facing dissolution. 4 years without filing accounts. Minimal evidence of actual charitable work. Authorities stepping in. If the charity collapses, it won't be because of bad press. It'll be because of non-compliance, legal inaction, a fundamental failure to meet the bare minimum expectations of transparency. You'd think someone who's faced as many reputational fires would be extra careful with the few public-facing institutions she has left. But somehow, the same pattern keeps playing out. Grand ventures, no follow-through, no accountability. So what does that say about her judgment? Because even if we give her the benefit of the doubt, and that's becoming harder to do, it still points to a chronic inability to recognize red flags, to vet the people she gets involved with, to take responsibility when those choices implode. Let's not forget, this isn't happening in isolation. Ferg's ties to Jeffrey Epstein, her history of debts, the cash for access scandal, her financial entanglements with Prince Andrew, it all adds up. It all lingers. The public memory is long. And every new scandal just confirms what many already suspect, that Sarah Ferguson's instincts, especially when it comes to money and partnerships, are deeply flawed. And yet, she keeps getting the benefit of the doubt. Why? Because for years, she's positioned herself as a relatable royal. The one who stumbled, but kept going. the one who made mistakes, but owned them, the survivor, the single mom, the ex-duchess who turned it around. But the facts say otherwise. The facts say this isn't a comeback arc. It's a rerun. Different names, different ventures, same outcome. And this time, the public is paying attention. Because when the failure includes over £1 million in taxpayer money, the stakes change. This isn't about celebrity gossip anymore. It's about waste, oversight, trust that was borrowed through a royal name, trust that helped secure funding, and trust that was absolutely not earned. So now we're left with a wrecked app, a failing charity, and a former duchess who, once again, seems to be walking away from the fallout with very little reflection. And if she thinks this is all going to blow over, she might want to take a closer look at the headlines. Because this isn't going away. Not this time. The Charity Commission is involved. The story has hit national press. The taxpayer angle has given this scandal real legs. And the public is asking the obvious questions. How did this get funded? Why wasn't there stricter oversight? And how is it possible that no one saw this coming? There's also a bigger conversation happening about how easily high-profile figures can move through industries with little resistance, simply by leveraging their name or status. About how public money is too often handed out with more faith than evidence. And about how influence, when it goes unchecked, can become dangerous. It's not about canceling Sarah Ferguson. It's about holding her, and people like her, to the same standards as everyone else. Because if a regular startup burned through £9 million with no product, people would be demanding answers. There would be audits, investigations, accountability. Why should this be any different? The era of passive celebrity endorsement is over. People want receipts. People want responsibility. And most of all, people want to know that their money, especially public money, isn't being funneled into doomed vanity projects just because someone famous smiled at a launch party. So here we are, a failed app, a charity in crisis, a former duchess in the hot seat, and once more, we're forced to ask the same tired question. How many times does this need to happen before something changes? Should the government reconsider how it evaluates these applications? Should public figures like Foji be required to disclose the full extent of their involvement in ventures that receive public funds? And at what point do repeated scandals stop being mistakes and start becoming the norm? Tell us what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you're just as frustrated as we are about how easily this whole situation spiraled, hit that like button. Share it with someone who still thinks a royal cosign equals reliability. And subscribe if you want to keep pulling back the curtain on scandals like these, where the glitz fades, but the mess stays center stage. Because in the world of business and royalty, there's one thing that never fails. When judgment goes, everything goes with it.